Hi, everybody.
Oh,
If I could just have you all mute yourselves for the time being, you'll have some time to talk with James as well, but just we'll have one person speak at a time to minimize any extra noise. And I'm just doing one little thing here, and then we'll be good to go.
I'm also going to do one little thing here.
Cool.
All right.
You're all set over there?
I'm all set over here.
All right, cool. I'm almost all set. All right, looks like we're good. Oops. Oh. All right. So, hi, I'm here with James W. Jesso with Psychedelic Club of Denver. My name's Andrew, and James, we're really excited to have you here with us today. I'll let you, give a little bit more of your own background, but I'm familiar with you as a podcaster and author. You do a lot of writing and speaking, and I guess I would think of you as like a psychedelic advocate and educator. So yeah, thank you so much for being with us. And what would you like us to all know about you?
Well, thank you, Andrew, for having me,
Yeah.
and to the Psychedelic Club of Denver. I'm not sure what to say about what you would want to know about me. Thought about giving you like my astrology sign. I like long walks on the beach, although I'm nowhere near a beach. I'm landlocked and stay-at-home orders and all the rest, like many,
Right.
many might be. Um, but yeah, so I run a podcast. I've written a couple books. I've traveled around the world, talking to people, and doing lectures on the things that I am curiously engaged with and wonder about deeply, all of which circling in some sense or another around psychedelics. And I guess um, earlier today I was having a conversation with somebody who actually lives in Colorado. I think he said he lives in Denver, and he had said something. He had pointed out something I'd said in a recent podcast with Bet Williams. How my interest, although I talk a lot about psychedelic therapy and the sort of psychotherapeutic models for understanding oneself as an agent operating inside of life amongst others, is really important and meaningful for me as a sense making tool, and it's a key area of focus. I'm not particularly interested in having a podcast about psychedelic therapy, nor being a person who is a psychedelic therapy person or one way or another, so much as I'm concerned about what does it mean to live a psychedelic life. Like,
Mm.
what does it mean to live a life where I really have learned the lessons that my psychedelic experiences have offered me in a way that that they walk with me as I walk with them in life. Um, I know that's very abstract and sort of general and maybe a bit hokey pokey. So if you've got any like more specifics, maybe it'll come off as a little less woo and a little more a little more substantiated, maybe.
Well, I'm really intrigued by what you're saying, about living a psychedelic life. And that totally resonates with me. And I also think that that's probably going to have a totally different definition for every person,
Mm-hmm.
based on their experiences. I mean, based on their nature and nurture plus their psychedelic experiences. So, what does that look like for you? And how are you doing on that path?
What does that look like for me? I mean, that's a big question. Um, on some sense, I could say that it looks like I occupy quite a bit of my cognitive or psychic bandwidth around. I could say that it could be because psychedelics are a important content of my life, both theoretically, conceptually, and although less over the last year and a half in practice as
Mm-hmm.
well. And I'd say, I think, kind of echoing Bet Williams, I think living a psychedelic life certainly means taking psychedelics. And so in that sense, maybe recently I haven't been as psychedelic as I could be. But I think it's less about the content of one's life. It's less about the content of my life and more about the manner in which I choose to engage my life and the manner in which I choose to consider myself in the world.
Mhm.
And I think it would be different for every person, but for me, it's about trying to live in practice with the things that I've learned in my psychedelic experiences, and so that they're not abstract. I mean, some of them are, but they're not things that existed back then in this sort of like context of consciousness that was totally divorced from the rest of my life. I mean, they were on some level, but that I have made effort to sort of translate them from that into my way in the world, and that I hold them with me as I move about and wonder about the various events in my life.
Mhm.
So again, this sounds very general, um, but something like the manner in which I have come to think about myself and the world is a direct inspiration from how I needed to learn how to think about myself and the world for the psilocybin experience in particular that I've had to make any sense at all. And so continuing to try to stay aligned with that manner of thinking is a way in which I try to continue to stay aligned with whatever it is that I was being taught at that time, which is an extension of trying to live a psychedelic life.
Very, very awesome. I think that that's such an important piece, and it's something that a lot of us in the psychedelic community really lose sight of. We kind of like look at it as this Wednesday back in 2017 when we had this experience, and it's this isolated incident that we're not really taking home, that we're really not integrating and living, actively living. So you mentioned psilocybin, and I know that that's been a really important part of your process, and that seems to be um, a psychedelic that you really gravitate towards.
Mhm.
What is it about psilocybin that you are drawn to so much that you prefer?
Um, hmm. It's funny because they both, it's the one that I have presently the most complicated relationship with as well, because it's like the one that seems to offer me and has offered me the most richness in my life from
Mhm.
like a what happens after kind of thing. And it's also the one that I am most intimidated by because they tend to take me on they tend to ask things of me that are I know in advance are likely to be quite difficult, even if
Mhm.
in the process they tend to be really caring about it, on some level. And I don't really know. I mean, it's just I could maybe explain certain elements of it, sort of characteristics of it, right? So that it's available, it's known to me, like I have a history with it. It had like a cultural place when I was growing up, you know,
Yeah.
something about the experience just seems to align with the way I want to be as a person, or maybe something about the experience embedded itself in my identity so long ago that I have this sort of like accidental conditioned identification with them. um, and maybe it's because I've invested so much attentional and cognitive and psychological and spiritual energy into trying to not only sense make them and those experiences for myself, but then to even go to another degree of then deconstructing all of that thinking and sense making in order to recapitulate it into sort of a logic and a rhetoric that allows other people to read it and go,
Mhm.
oh, right. um, those are all sort of characteristics, but if I really sort of like let myself really open up to wondering about that, it's like, I don't know. I mean, maybe they called me. I don't want to get on this sort of quasi megalomaniacal, like the mushrooms chose me, messianic, the mushrooms chose me, man, or whatever. But like, I don't know. It's just something about it there that got me connected is a part of a mystery that in all honesty, I don't want to solve. I spend a lot of
Sure.
cognitive energy and to degrees of stress, but also like um effervescence, some stress, some effervescence, wowness to it.
Mhm.
Trying to like figure out some bits of the mystery, but that particular part of it, I feel good about being able to say like, I don't know, something mysterious about it, Yeah.
Absolutely. One of the really wonderful things that psychedelics have really turned me onto, I guess, is how much of a mystery everything is, and that is a joy in and of itself. Like it's sort of it's beautiful not knowing. Um, so before I open this up to everybody else, because I want to be mindful of your time, I am curious about what would you like to discuss why you're taking this break for the last year and a half from psychedelics?
Yeah, good question. Maybe I'll step back before I answer it,
Okay,
or respond to it. Something you said there about what was the language? My brain's not at its best right now. Pardon me. It's close to my
understandable.
bedtime. So you had said something like the mystery can be seen. The mystery of all these things can be seen by you. And something that I thought of was about what was it? About how uh, the mystery becomes the object of awareness,
Mm,
right? But being moved by the mystery in a way that makes you go, wow, how mysterious, is a way in which you observe a thing, a way in which you observe a thing. And that is a part of what psychedelics offer, as much as the awareness that there is a mystery,
mm,
but the capacity to be moved by that thing in a way that is significant or meaningful enough to wrap you in it.
yeah,
So yeah, just something, maybe as something, a piece for everyone to hang on. There's something I'll probably hang on because it seems fun
I
and
love that.
interesting. So what's kind of got me distant right now from it? Well, I don't know. Have you guys heard of the coronavirus?
No, I haven't heard about that. What is that?
Well, you know what? In all honesty, just pandemic life has made
Yeah.
things very complex and complicated, and there's been some beautiful experiences that have come out of some explorations in that. Um,
from from my
Oh,
in my own
somebody
words,
there needs to mute
yeah,
their.
we are dealing with
There we go. Sorry, James.
oh, it's okay. Um, uh, there's been some beautiful explorations in that, but as a consequence, and maybe this is maybe one of those situations where um, like not being able to take my own advice or something. I would never recommend more people take more psychedelics during the pandemic. Things are crazy and it's easy to get overwhelmed, and when you don't have larger capacities to connect in community and like be supported as needed without possibly breaking laws or putting yourself in harm's way or others, I would never recommend that. But it's like the larger existential intensity and stress of everything that's happening, existing also in this situation of being very isolated. um, Although I can see on some level that perhaps experiencing more psilocybin, for example, might help me break out of that, and fair play. um, I'd still just be doing it in my house by myself alone, or with my partner supporting me or what have you, but it would just be a thing that I was still doing alone. And I'm
Yeah.
not at a place in my life right now where I feel like that particular experience is going to serve when I don't have a community to step back into afterwards. And it's winter right now here in Canada. And being able to do something that would be very satisfying and nourishing for that experience, that where I couldn't connect with other people, would be to connect with the forest and this kind of thing. And that's not really as available to me now. I mean, these all maybe sound like excuses, and possibly they are. Maybe just on the other side of the pandemic, and perhaps this makes me a hypocrite. I feel a little afraid of what's there,
Hmm.
and I feel comfortable accepting that. And I feel also comfortable accepting that when the time is right and ripe, I will, as I have done many times before, know that it's time to manage the courage necessary to uncover those things. Um, and another part of me is I'm working quite hard right now writing something, and again, this might be just like an excuse, but in my mind, I'm like, I have to finish focusing on this thing that I'm working on until I go introduce a shit ton of new interesting things to try to make sense of. And that seemed to make sense when I started it, but now that it's a year that I'm working on it, maybe I need to take another frame of reference and possibly introduce some novelty. But yeah, I think it mostly comes down to like the intensity of trying to sense make life in the pandemic is so complex right now and so demanding that I'm not exactly excited or like hungry to introduce another apocalypse in the midst of all of this. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, it takes a tremendous amount of courage on a beautiful day in the middle of July to take a look at yourself like that, when we're not in the middle of a pandemic. So it takes a lot more courage now. For what it's worth, I do think that for those who have access and are very intrepid, that the experience of 5-MeO-DMT kind of lends itself to the isolation that we're in right now, because that experience for me is just, it's all you anyway. That's an aside, not that I'm encouraging anybody to do anything at any time.
And I kind of want to speak to that. And I want to speak to this because when you say I'm not encouraging anyone to do anything at this time, that is likely a very true statement, a very authentic statement. And also it can come off as one of those like, we got to say it so we don't get in trouble kind of statements.
Sure.
But and I haven't had 5-MeO-DMT, so you could call me one of those like scowling, angry, like bystanders be like, stop having so much fun, you kids over there. But in my opinion, I don't think anyone who doesn't have an established practice and familiarity and skill set for doing 5-MeO-DMT and isn't in a community of people holding them in context, that I don't think that they should be smoking 5-MeO-DMT as their psychedelic of choice during the pandemic as a way of coping with isolation. I really don't think that's a safe or good idea.
I agree. I mean, it's not a healthy coping mechanism. To me, it just feels a little more on brand for what we're living with right now. But yeah, I appreciate everything that you just said. So at this point, I just want to kind of turn things over to the group here. If anybody has any questions for James, we don't have a ton of time. And also just, if you want to ask a question, unmute yourself and be aware that this is being shared on Facebook Live right now. So if you don't want yourself on Facebook, maybe type something in the chat and I can ask the question, or maybe James will see it. Otherwise, floor is open to whoever has a question. Anybody out there?
Womp womp. Crickets. Do you have a crickets soundtrack?
Well, if not, I guess just you and I can keep on chatting for another little bit of time. So I know that, and if anybody does have a question at any point during our conversation, just shout it out and we'll get you in there. Hi, Rob.
Hey, yeah. Hey, thanks for doing this. This is pretty cool. I'm new to the community. I'm new to the meetup, but I'm very interested. And I was wondering if James could talk a little bit more about. I didn't know anything about him before tonight. You mentioned the podcast. I am an avid podcast listener. I drive a lot for work. Can you tell us about the podcast and what it's called and where I can find it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the podcast is called Adventures Through the Mind, and it's an interview-based podcast where I interview a variety of people. I mean, it's sort of I'm like thinking about what the sort of like catch brand description would be, but I interview various experts and luminaries in the psychedelic and psychedelic related fields. But I'd like to think of it as a way in which I get an opportunity to explore some of the central questions that I have, like, how do I live a psychedelic life? How do I make sense of my psychedelic experiences? What does the psychedelic experience say or reveal to us insofar as the situation we're in as a whole? as communities, as relational beings and relationships, and how does the intersection of science and psychotherapy meeting with psychedelics, and because of that, those same things then meeting back into psychedelic and spiritual culture, all sort of like, what are some of the things that we have to learn in that? And are there people who are doing work that seems to add into our ability to individually and collectively sense make being in this world and taking psychedelics and being moved by the psychedelic experience? That sounds, again, like maybe very philosophical, but like the bottom line is I have conversations with people, very interview-esque style, long form, and those people are usually people working diligently in the psychedelic field, or fields related to psychedelics, such as psychotherapy. But I also cover things like sexuality and spirituality and cognitive neuroscience, and yeah. And you can find it on iTunes, Spotify. It's on YouTube as a video as well.
Awesome. Sounds right up my alley. I'll look on Google Podcasts. That's where I get most of them. But
it's on Google Podcasts. It's basically anywhere you can imagine it's there. So enjoy, Rob. I hope you appreciate them.
Thank you. Yeah. So I have a science background and a lot of spiritual experience, and coming at it kind of from that angle, but studied it for years. Had my first experiences recently with psilocybin, and very, very helpful and positive experiences. So, kind of taking it easy, but learning more and more, and looking forward to learning more. And thank you. Yeah.
Awesome.
So we had a couple of questions come up in the chat. So I'll just read them out.
Great.
Among the people you've interviewed, who has influenced you most recently?
Oh, among the people I've interviewed, well, recently I'm not really moved by anyone that I've been interviewed explicitly. Although, because right now I'm feeling super nerdy excited about a new podcast I found by a guy named Dr. Andrew Huberman, the Huberman Lab podcast. And I just get really nerded out when I'm learning about things like neuromodulators, the neuromodulatory, like the impact circadian rhythms and light exposure has on sleep and wakefulness, and the neuromodulatory systems related with all of it. It's just like gets me so hot in the pants. Yeah, but I'd say actually recently one of the most sort of inspired, as in like excited, engaged conversations I had for the podcast was with two were anonymous, one of which exposed their names, two people working in the relational somatic therapy field, and were applying relational somatic therapy to psychedelic therapy. The person who revealed their name, her name is Rita. She went by Tooth Fairy. She had been on another anonymous podcast previously where I interviewed 3 underground female psychedelic psychotherapists out of Canada. And then the other person's name was Curls. We talked about relational somatic therapy, from theoretically what that is, and then what that looks like in the act of a psychedelic, like a psychedelic therapy session. And that was really inspiring for me, because, and I see the comment here from Liz. Thank you very much, Liz. And that was because it was exciting for me, because it was related to the thing that I'm writing about, which I don't necessarily want to talk about because I can be kind of neurotic about it. Like, no one's seen it. Even my partner, who may or may not be still on this call, like, she doesn't even know anything about it. So it's like, I'm like afraid to like say anything, and then all of a sudden like the muse will leave me. But I also recognize, like, at some point it's gotta get exposed to somebody. So it's coming out, but so I don't want to speak to exactly what it's about, but just don't tell anyone. It's about mushrooms.
What?
Yeah. Well, it's disgusting. Basically, I've been doing integration sessions with people, integration coaching for the last few years, and have been unlocking a lot of incredible things in my research and in that practice, and seeing these things come to fruit for people. And I'm trying to write those things together in a way that makes them both in depth and engaging intellectually and also practically. And there's a tight connection with what I'm writing to the talk that I gave at Breaking Convention in 2019. As this book was supposed to me just quick cleaning up the transcript, and now a year later I'm on like revision 9, and yeah, so that's that. Was there?
There's one more at the bottom there.
Okay. Sorry, I'm taking your role away from you, Andrew.
That's all right, man.
I think for good measure, I think maybe you should read it as
Okay.
our host. Yeah.
How do psychedelics work with mindfulness-based interventions, e.g., MBSR, IPNB, DBT, etc.?
So I don't know what MBSR or IPNB is. I know DBT. I mean, it kind of. I don't really know how to answer that question. It would be different for different situations. I mean, I'll answer it this way, that the world of how psychedelics, the world wherein psychedelics are being understood and applied to psychotherapy is growing substantially. And there's a lot of underground work that's already established, and there's some above ground work that is now significantly established, but most of that is following a protocol that is sort of general, especially the psilocybin stuff. You give them psychotherapy, then you give them a big psilocybin experience, then you give them psychotherapy. And I know that they have their own sort of model. Rosalind Watts, for example, at Imperial, she has her Accept, Connect, Embody model, beautiful model. And it's more like psychotherapy assisted psilocybin than it is psilocybin assisted psychotherapy. But then there's a variety of different ways in which people are learning to apply these things. If you imagine that you have a molecule, you have a substance that enables you to dismantle the normal operational processes of the mind and of the identity of the the interpretive factors that give meaning to our life based in whatever sort of long history of meaningful events have given rise to that sort of social conditioning or personal conditioning or whatever, and that you can get into that space and do psychotherapy, then there's a lot of opportunity. But so for exactly how it might apply to these particular sort of processes, I don't know. I mean, maybe I would imagine certain styles are going to be supported by psychedelics and different psychedelics differently and more effectively. So I don't think, for example, a big dose, like a big dose of psilocybin is going to be particularly helpful for someone who's trying to, in the session, do some kind of talk therapy, or, but a lower dose might, so, I mean, I'm not able to answer that question. And the answer that I did give hopefully didn't sound too much like a runaround way of avoiding the fact that I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. Cool, but I do believe that mindfulness, or capacity to be able to somewhat neutrally attend to or equanimously attend to experiences arising in the body, is a fundamental skill set for navigating life as well as psychedelic experiences. And I think having mindfulness inspired psychotherapeutic practices being supported with psychedelics in some way or another, that they're likely going to find a lot of benefit in a lot of different ways. But what those ways look like, I don't know. Not presently anyways. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. So I know we're running a little bit out of time here, but we've got Liz is wondering, what is the name of that podcast that you mentioned that was talking about the circadian rhythms and light, and I don't remember all of what you said.
Yeah, the Huberman Lab podcast. So Huberman, Huberman. I think that's how you spell it. Huberman Lab podcast. He's funny. He's funny too, in a way that's not intentionally funny. It's just like, so I have a good laugh. There you go. That's it. That's
cool.
It. Yeah.
Do we maybe want to take one more question before we call it a night?
I'm in it. I mean, like, these have been tough questions. Like, I definitely did. I came unprepared / I had no idea what you were going to ask. So pulling my brain out of this little world that I'm in, where I'm just thinking about what I'm writing about and pretty much nothing else. So yeah. But yeah, I'd be down to take a couple more questions if there's some desire.
Does anybody have any questions for James? Hmm. Usually people are so chatty.
I mean, I won't take it personally. I'm kidding. I mean, maybe I scared people with the fact that I didn't even know the answer to half the questions that are given to me.
You've you've bluffed it really well. Maybe that's what's scary.
I can say
Yeah.
something. This is Abby.
Hi.
Hi, Abby.
This is my first time to this meetup, and it's the first time I have learned of your work. But I just wanted to share that I think it's just amazing to be hearing your thoughts and be in conversation with you in these thoughts of exploring experience, and whether or not that's happening through mindfulness and in our work with the medicine. I think what I just am resonating with is the journey and the exploration and the finding ways of building that into a way where we have our direction. And so maybe that's just a reflection, but it's really awesome to hear your thoughts, and thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Abby.
Any more final thoughts or questions before James heads off into the wild blue yonder?
Looks like polyvagal theory and Deb Dana. Oh, you're welcome, Liz. Polyvagal theory and Deb Dana. How does that connect? Like, so the question is like, how does Deb Dana and polyvagal theory connect, or how does polyvagal theory connect with psychedelic work?
So thank you. This has been lovely. So my question is, considering polyvagal theory, and so I'm a therapist, and this is really lighting me up. And honestly, like, I have found your podcast to be like most useful of all the ways to introduce clients to this idea. It's very accessible. It's very, it's difficult, but it's accessible enough. And because it's a difficult concept. But I'm wondering, like, how do you see the connection between polyvagal theory and, for example, I have some folks who have pretty profound depression and are only being met by ketamine and are in trials for things like psilocybin. What do you see as being like the way that I, as a therapist, could help them maybe build like narrative models for how to think about their experience as people utilizing these chemical interventions, also building meaning around it? I feel like I'm flailing, but maybe that's enough for you to kind of give me an idea of like how I can present it to my own clients in a meaningful way. And I typically work with people over 65, not that that necessarily makes a huge difference, but just for context.
I mean, there's a lot there, and then also, each person's kind of different, and each thing that they're facing is kind of different, and each person's experience is kind of different. But I think the big thing that I carry with when I think about, say, integrating a psychedelic experience or integrating a difficult experience of any variety, because I mean, in some sense, if you're thinking about healing from depression, chances are the effort is to sort of open up to and integrate extremely difficult experiences at some point that got logged into the nervous system and the identity to the point in which it is now manifesting as the symptom set that we describe as depression. That the meaning-making process is such that the manner in which we learn to engage what is happening now is what will produce what is happening, what is happening now will mean later. So an event is happening, it means something now, but what it will mean will be determined by how we show up to the impact of whatever that experience is. So another way to look at this is like, quote from a person I hold as a teacher in my life, Stephen Jenkinson, that the crucible of life's meaning is in how you wrestle with the way things are. And that part of something having generative meaning is showing up to it in a way that is generative. It's curious, it's wondering, it's surrendered, and it's whatever. And that when you're in therapy with another person, you're not doing that by yourself. You're doing that as a team, and that is happening with the support of that other person. And even when in the experience you don't understand what's happening, even when in the process of trying to integrate this, it still feels confusing, and there's still pain, and there's still the grief left over of maybe having lost control or whatever it is, or even just whatever it is, that the manner in which the person supporting you is holding you is also feeding into what it will all mean later. And that sounds really, as I described it, maybe it's just because I'm so tired, my working memory is really short, but
that's
something.
co-regulation, right? Like that's the experience of co-regulating with another person and having the experience of like deeply engaging with someone in a way that's pretty powerful, which maybe happens sometimes in a psychedelic situation, but can happen in a pretty powerful way with someone. But I wonder to the extent, like, how, like, can this be augmented? And living in Georgia, like, you know, it's not going to happen anytime soon, but like, it is going to hopefully be something that is maybe a shortcut to being able to co-regulate with someone. So that was, thank you for your answer.
I'm curious about that. What do you mean, can it be augmented? Because like I think what I was trying to say, like I talked about co-regulation, but what I was trying to say is that like something along the lines of the meaning of the thing is only visible in hindsight, and what it will mean is not what it means now. What it will mean will be the consequence of how we show up to what it means now. And if you're integrating a psychedelic experience, you never know what it's going to mean or what it's going to amount to until you engage it in a way that crafts that meaning over time in a collaborative process with the long tail impact of the experience itself.
And I don't have enough experience with people who have had that to be able to speak to that, but who have had that kind of psychedelic experience, nor have I had it myself. I mean, I'm interested in learning, but like, I feel like there is something that happens potentially, and this is just a thought experiment, but like, it feels like there's something that happens potentially in the therapeutic environment, the co-regulation, that is transcendent, you know, that is something that is so connected, that is so outside of the ordinary experience that a person has, that potentially it has that kind of like, you know, neurons firing in every direction, you know, very much outside the normal experience of human life, engagement, that I wonder if it parallels in some ways like the psychedelic experience. And so I think I'm here just as a newbie, like trying to understand, is there a way that I can help somebody who struggles to connect interpersonally and co-regulate, right? You know, and it may take like 7 or 8 weeks, and maybe insurance will pay for that or not. You know, is there a way that I could like cut to the chase, help somebody connect with me deeply as a safe co-regulating person, and be able to get into it, get into the work real quickly? And I don't know, I think it's kind of a moot point perhaps because it's not legal right now. But it is the, hopefully the trajectory that I want to be on. So that's part of why I'm here.
Great. So if I understand your question, your thank you so much for being having the courage to just wonder out loud to a group of people, knowing that you're on the edge of your thinking. That is a very vulnerable and beautiful and courageous thing to do. What I think I understand is you asking something along the lines of, just like, are psychedelics maybe the thing that can come in to sort of augment the long process of going through the long therapy process? And I think to some sense, yes, because that's what we're learning in the research, is that you can achieve a huge amount of benefit, or like a huge amount of positive result very quickly with psychedelics compared to, say, traditional therapies. How sustainable those are in the long term is still trying to be figured out. Certainly the scientific research, clinical research hasn't figured out how to hold it for long periods of time yet. The underground might have, but the thing with that is that there's still the necessity of building the safety, the interpersonal safety between you and your client before the session. Because if that's not solid, then the possibility of course, you're in a psychedelic therapy session. You take psychedelics, context mediates what that psychedelic experience brings forth. That context being, environmental context, sociocultural context. It also is like interpersonal context, the people you're with, it's also pharmacological context, how much of what you took. But there's also a mindset context, obviously. It's like why and how and with what you're showing up with. And when you're going in for a psychedelic therapy session, chances are you're kind of at that point where you're like, yeah, I'm trying to do the deep work, which means you're like trying to get into the deep stuff. And if big stuff comes up and it's dangerous stuff, perceived to the nervous system, and the interpersonal safety isn't present there between client and therapist, then that's going to occupy the space. And if therapist isn't ready to sort of hold that, then it can end up causing more harm than good. So although it can sort of augment and rocket fuel the process, it isn't a way to cut corners on the basic foundations of establishing interpersonal safety, because that becomes even more necessary. It's not so necessary, when no one's they're not really opening up anyways, right? So it doesn't matter necessarily how safe they feel with you if the session is them closed. I mean, obviously that matters because that helps them open. But if you're using a pharmacological agent to force that opening, then that the establishment of that safety, at least on a procedural level, like as in they trust that you will hold their hand, is vitally important. Yeah.
Well, and holding their hand, like literally I would hold their hand, but like it's a teletherapy session, so it's not going to happen.
Oh, yeah. I don't think anybody should be doing psychedelic teletherapy sessions. Maybe like microdosing on the day if that person is relatively familiar with the process. But yeah, I don't think outside of responding to crisis, like getting onto Tripsit because you're like took the dose and you're like, holy shit, I'm freaking out and I need to just go chat with somebody, that we should be doing virtual psychedelic experiences, like virtually held psychedelic therapy sessions, especially.
Thank you.
But I don't think I'm breaking the bank or pushing the boundary to make that comment. And yes, you're welcome. Thank you for your questions. Yeah.
There's actually a company who that's their whole game. They do virtual ketamine therapy sessions. Yeah, isn't that crazy?
I was just talking with somebody today and they echoed something that I personally feel, which is like, I've been wondering about, which is, okay, so I think it's very possible to do some incredible work with ketamine, right? The research and the sort of stuff coming up around, especially IFS with ketamine and like a number of things, that there's like some really incredible, like you were saying, this augmented capacity there. But then there's also this whole industry that's come up with, hey, none of the psychiatric medicines are giving you are working. Well, we have the cure, we'll give you ketamine. You come in, we shoot you up full of ketamine, you have an experience and you're good for like 7 to 10 days, cured for like 7 to 10 days. Well, then just come on back. So it's like, it kind of wigs me out. And especially too, it's like, from what I understand, like some of the certification to give ketamine and work in a ketamine clinic is like a weekend, I mean, I can tell you from Swim once told me, but I can tell you from firsthand, ketamine experiences are crazy. Some of them are just absolutely bonkers. And if you're going to have somebody being like, I'm your ketamine therapist, and they have no idea in any way the type of unfucking believable realities you're about to go into, and you come out and you try to make sense of that, and the only person that you have to help you is someone who basically just trained on keeping your body safe after they give you the injection and receive your money, I do not approve. I mean, I'm not a regulatory agent, so my approval doesn't mean jack squat to the money-making industries, but I think that's, but also I want to say, like, if there's anyone listening, that's the only relief you've gotten, and you're getting relief and your life is like back together because of that. Fuck yeah, you go for it, 100%. My problems with how the industry is profiting and growing around that is ultimately nothing compared to if it's giving you benefit in your life. Yeah.
Cool.
May I chime in real quick?
Sure.
I just want to say hello. I just like randomly got this email. I'm a patron of James, and I'm just really happy to be here in this space and having this conversation. And I just felt like chiming in on that note. I work at Mindbloom, so I'm providing ketamine-assisted services for others in these times in COVID. And I've noticed some remarkable shifts in people that are, and in this process, I've been able to educate them about how to take medicine responsibly at home and how to be intentional about it. And I also go through a process of integration with them, utilizing the neuroplasticity that ketamine can induce to help people to, pivot their lives in the direction that they desire. So I think I wanted to just kind of maybe riff on the integration piece a little bit more of like how there's so much potential right now within that realm of, ketamine-assisted psychotherapy and virtual telemedicine services right now, and how that's what is available currently. Currently, that is what we are, that's what we have. And it's working for people like on a tremendously profound level, and somebody that's witnessing the transformation happen in my clients every day. So how do we integrate like psychedelics being worked with in this way? How can we integrate psychedelics collectively, really, as it's becoming more mainstream? Yeah.
Well, Sarah, I thank you for tuning in. Thank you for that comment. I'm so happy to hear that this clinic that you're working with has you as a resource, and that you're doing more than a drive-through ketamine. You're really supporting people in making sense of their experiences for the betterment of their life. So I'm really happy to hear that. I mean, a part of me wants to be like, do this. And another part of me is like, but don't say that, because you're still trying to figure out if that's real. But I think what you said there about neuroplasticity, I really think that is what's about to explode as being like oh yeah, that's what we're going to use these things to do. Now we just have to figure out, how do we actually do the neuroplasticity thing? How do we actually use neuroplasticity, the increase in neuroplasticity, to result in long-term changes in how a person experiences and engages their life on not just like this is how I think about life sort of thing, but on the level of nervous system activation, on the level of the language I like to use is the affect disposition from which reality is being perceived, rendered, understood, and engaged, right? So it's like, how do we train that? And I've been thinking about this. It's like, how do we train our nervous systems to have the effective capacity and response to the result of deep wounds from past being triggered now, and we have the capacity to respond to it differently based in what was received what was received as a lesson, a non-conceptual lesson during our psychedelic experiences, now learned. How do we kind of went off on a trail there. How do we learn how to operate and manage our nervous systems based on those experiences the same way we would learn to juggle? How do we practice that affective state, that part of the experience, in a way that we overlearn it to the point where it becomes, on some level, an automatic response to life, right? And not necessarily to all life, but like an automatic response that this is now the affect disposition from which the various manifestations of the complex that surrounded that wound is now engaged from when activated. I think that the work of Rick Hansen has a lot to offer in that sense, if we start to carry that over. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for such a well-rounded understanding of integration. and just this process that that has so many layers to it. And I really appreciate your work. I've been following your work for years, and just its evolution has been beautiful, like a mycelial spore sprouting through the forest and growing beautiful tendrils underground and now above ground. And just to see the evolution of your work and what you're doing is super beautiful and affirming. So thank you so much, James. Thank you to this space.
Thanks, Sarah. Nice to have a face-to-face, well,
Yeah.
About as face-to-face as
Yeah.
this gets. Thank you.
All right. Well, it's about time for us to let James go. So thank you so much, everybody, for being here. We really appreciate you. Looking forward to seeing you all in the real world one of these days. And until then, excited to keep doing these online meetups. And James, before we say goodbye, maybe you could just tell everybody, where can we check you out? Where can we find your books? What are the books that you have in print, and what are they called? Just all that fun stuff would be a great place to leave off.
Okay, great. So everything you can find at jameswjesso.com, Jesso. I think it's written on the screen for Zoom, Jesso, jameswjesso.com. That's where you find everything. But specifically, if you want to look for my podcast, it's Adventures Through the Mind. And my books are called Decomposing the Shadow and The True Light of Darkness. And they're both about working with psilocybin mushrooms, one of which more cognitive framework, the other more narrative storytelling, both trying to address the same issue. Andrew, thank you very much. Psychedelic Club of Denver, thank you so much for your time and for honoring me with your attention. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks for being here, James. And thanks to everybody else. Stay safe and have a beautiful night. Bye.